Something new is stirring in you, a quiet whisper maybe, a dream that feels both foreign and familiar, something you thought you'd outgrown, or perhaps something you never allowed yourself to fully acknowledge, and you're wondering if it's too late to listen. Maybe it's the urge to learn Italian after always being too practical for such things. Maybe it's the desire to write that novel that's been living in the back of your mind for decades. Or perhaps it's something simpler, the longing to garden for beauty, not just maintenance, the wish to dance again. What I've learned after working with thousands of people is this: there's a manifestation pattern that only emerges in your 60s and beyond. It's not like the urgent, ego-driven desires of your younger years. This is something different, something deeper, something that many people dismiss as impractical or unrealistic. But what if I told you this stirring isn't a mistake? What if it's actually your soul's graduation gift to itself? You see, most of us spend our 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s manifesting what we think we should want. The career that provides security, the house that impresses neighbors, the achievements that prove our worth. We manifest from a place of proving ourselves, of fitting in, of being responsible to everyone except our deepest creative self. We become masters at dismissing our authentic desires as luxuries we can't afford, not financially, but emotionally. There was always someone else's needs to consider, always the next practical step, always the voice that said, maybe later when everything else is settled. But somewhere in your 60s, something shifts. The voice of should grows quieter. The need to impress others fades. Children are grown, careers are established, and suddenly there's space. Space for what you actually want to create rather than what you feel obligated to accomplish. This is when the artist who never painted picks up a brush and discovers colors that speak to something wordless inside. When the person who always played it safe suddenly wants to travel alone to places that call to their imagination. When someone starts writing poetry that no one else will read, or learning languages for the pure pleasure of new sounds. As you listen to this, you might notice what word wants to meet you today. There's no action needed yet. Just notice what feels true in your body as we explore this together. And here's what most people misunderstand about this pattern. They think these late blooming desires are frivolous, impractical, a midlife crisis that arrived late. They judge themselves for wanting things that don't contribute to retirement savings or family stability. They wonder if they're being selfish or unrealistic, but I've seen something different in my work with people experiencing this awakening. I've seen that these desires often carry the purest creative energy a person has ever experienced, because now, finally, you're manifesting from authenticity instead of anxiety, from joy instead of fear, from the accumulated wisdom of having lived long enough to know what truly matters. There's a reason these desires surface now, and it's not because you're having some kind of breakdown. It's because you're finally mature enough, spiritually and emotionally, to manifest from love instead of need, from wholeness instead of lack, from the desire to express rather than acquire. This shows up in your body in a very specific way, and I want you to pay attention because your body is always your wisest teacher. There's often a flutter of excitement in your chest when you think about this new possibility, a lightness, almost like the feeling you had as a child when you imagined what you wanted to be when you grew up. It's the same quality of pure possibility, untainted by practical concerns. But alongside that flutter, there might be a heaviness in your stomach. The heaviness of all the voices that say, be realistic or act your age. You might feel this as actual physical weight, as if you're carrying stones made of old judgments about what's appropriate for someone your age. You might feel pulled between two energies, one that feels expansive, alive, almost giddy with possibility, another that feels protective and cautious, reminding you of all the reasons why this isn't practical. Your shoulders might carry the weight of decades of being the responsible one. Your throat might feel tight when you try to speak about what you really want, as if the words themselves are somehow dangerous. You might find yourself whispering about these desires or only acknowledging them privately, and there's often a deep tiredness, not just physical tiredness, but soul tiredness from spending so many years creating what others expected instead of what your heart desired, the fatigue that comes from decades of saying yes to shoulds and no to wants. But here's what I want you to understand. There is nothing wrong with having desires at 60, 70, 80, or beyond. Your creative life force doesn't have an expiration date. Your dreams don't become invalid simply because you've lived longer. In fact, they might be more valid now than ever because they're no longer contaminated by the need to prove anything to anyone. If it feels kind, you can write "I allow" just for yourself, just as acknowledgement of what's stirring. Now, the shadow side of this pattern is real, and we need to address it with compassion. There's often shame around these emerging desires. Shame that whispers you should have figured this out earlier, that you've wasted time, that it's selfish to want something new when others are counting on your stability. There's the fear that pursuing these dreams means abandoning responsibility or disappointing people who see you as the reliable one. The worry that you don't deserve to want things that bring you joy rather than security. Sometimes there's grief too. Grief for all the years when you didn't allow yourself to want these things. Grief for the parts of yourself that got buried under decades of practical living. But here's the gift hidden in this pattern. These late life desires are often the most authentic ones you've ever experienced. They emerge not from lack or desperation, but from a place of having lived enough to know what truly matters. They come not from the ego's need to prove or acquire, but from the soul's desire to express and create. They're not about impressing anyone or achieving external validation. They're about the pure joy of bringing something new into existence simply because it wants to exist through you. They're about honoring the creative force that has been patiently waiting for the right season to emerge. This is manifestation in its purest form, not manifestation from fear or need, but manifestation from love and authentic self-expression, not creation driven by what you lack, but creation inspired by the abundance of life experience you now carry. You now have decades of wisdom, perspective, and hard-won self-knowledge. You understand yourself better. You know what brings you joy and what drains your energy. You're less concerned with others' opinions and more interested in authenticity. This makes you a more powerful manifester than you've ever been, because true manifestation happens when there's alignment between what you desire and who you are. And you may finally know who you are underneath all the roles. If you're choosing gentleness with yourself today, you can write gentle. Let me offer you some ways to honor this pattern. First, create a practice of curiosity without commitment. Keep a small notebook beside your bed, and when those whispers of possibility come, often in the early morning or just before sleep, write them down without judgment. Don't analyze whether they're realistic, just capture them gently. Second, give yourself permission to explore without the pressure of big decisions. If something is calling you, you can say yes to learning more without saying yes to changing your entire life. Research that art class, but you don't have to enroll. Read about that place you want to visit, but you don't have to book a ticket. Third, practice the phrase, "I'm allowed to want this." Say it when the shame voices get loud. You're allowed to want things that aren't practical. You're allowed to desire experiences that serve no purpose other than bringing you alive. Fourth, notice where in your body these desires live. Is there a warmth in your chest when you think about learning to paint? A lightness in your stomach when you imagine traveling? Place your hand there when you think about these desires. Breathe into that space. Fifth, release the timeline pressure that has driven so much of your life. These desires don't need to manifest on anyone else's schedule. They can unfold slowly in their own season. You have time. You have the rest of your life to explore what wants to emerge. Sixth, find one small step you can take today that moves you toward the feeling of this desire rather than toward the achievement of it. If you want to paint, buy one tube of your favorite color. If you want to travel, look at photos of places that call you. Let the desire have a small physical form. Seventh, practice gratitude for the stirring itself. Thank your soul for still dreaming, still wanting, still believing in possibility. After all these years of practical living, this stirring is evidence that you're still growing, still becoming. Eighth, create boundaries around the voices that try to diminish these desires. You don't need to justify your longings to anyone. You don't need to make them make practical sense. You can simply hold them with tenderness and see what wants to unfold. As you try this, you might choose one word to anchor the experience. You don't need to do this perfectly. Awareness is enough. What I've witnessed over and over is this: when someone honors these late life desires with compassion instead of criticism, something beautiful happens. They don't usually manifest exactly what they expected. Instead, they manifest something even better, a renewed sense of aliveness, a connection to their creative essence that may have been dormant for decades, a permission to live more authentically. These desires aren't asking you to abandon everything you've built. They're asking you to remember that you're still building, still becoming, still allowed to surprise yourself with what wants to emerge through you. The woman who starts painting at 70 may never have a gallery show, but she discovers colors that speak to something wordless in her soul. The man who learns guitar at 65 may never play for anyone but himself, but he finds music that helps him process emotions. This isn't about achievement in the way your younger self understood achievement. This is about expression, exploration, and the joy of creating simply because you can, because you want to, because something in you is still reaching toward beauty and meaning. You don't need to justify these longings. You don't need to make them make practical sense. You just need to listen with kindness to what your soul is trying to tell you about what it wants to create next. I am learning to trust the desires that come to me now. I honor the creative force that moves through me at every age. My dreams are valid whether they're practical or not. I give myself permission to want what brings me alive. I trust that what wants to emerge through me can find its way. There is no expiration date on joy, creativity, or authentic desire. Remember, you don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay open to the possibility that your most authentic creations might still be ahead. This content is for educational and spiritual reflection purposes only. It is not a substitute for medical, psychological, legal, or financial advice.